Cash Out is now facing a sentence that has left the entire hip-hop community questioning how a rapper who hit #1 on the Billboard Rap Airplay chart could end up with life in prison plus 70 years for running a sex trafficking ring with his own mother, Linda Smith, as an active walker.
Whose real name is John Michael Gibson, guilty on multiple charges.
Behind the platinum success of Cashin Out and performances with major artists, Cash Out was running a criminal enterprise so organized and brutal that Fulton County prosecutors hit him with RICO charges and secured convictions on pimping and trafficking.
The day these defendants chose to commit these crimes against me, they gave me a life sentence.
The shocking truth behind what brought this Atlanta rapper down involves a family-run trafficking operation that used their record label Pyres Music Group LLC as a front to recruit and exploit women, and the most disturbing part? His own mother, Linda Smith, wasn't a victim in this story. She was sentenced to 30 years for her active participation in the trafficking operation. Yo, what's good, y'all? We about to dive deep into some real street drama that's been shaking up the hip-hop community and exposing the absolute darkest side of what happens when fame, family, and criminal enterprise collide in the worst possible way. This ain't just about a rapper who fell off. This is about someone who had legitimate success with Epic Records, but chose to build a criminal operation that destroyed lives and ended with him getting convicted after a month-long trial in Fulton County. By the end of this deep dive, you're gonna understand exactly how Cash Out, whose legal name is John Michael Hakeem Gibson, went from performing hits like Cashin' Out and She Twerkin' to being labeled a leader of a trafficking and prostitution enterprise, and how his mother became a willing participant in one of Atlanta's most disturbing family-run criminal operations. Context section: the rise and fall of Cash Out. Now, before we get into this wild and disturbing ride, let me keep it 100 with y'all about what actually happened in this case, because the headlines saying rapper pimps out his own mom don't tell the complete story of the systematic criminal enterprise that was exposed in Fulton County Court. We about to separate the facts from the fiction using actual trial evidence, court documents, and victim testimony that led to these life sentences. That's the year that changed everything for John Gibson, better known as Cash Out, when his debut single, Cashin' Out, reached #1 on the Billboard Rap Airplay chart. This Atlanta native was living what every rapper dreams about, a hit record that was everywhere, a deal with Epic Records, and the kind of success that should have been the foundation for a long-term career in music. He followed up with another hit, She Twerkin', 2 years later, when he also released his sole album, Let's Get It. But here's where we need to understand the timeline that led to this criminal case. Gibson first rose to fame in 2011 when he signed with Epic Records, and his career peaked with Cashin' Out reaching #1, 36 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. According to court documents, Cash Out's racketeering crimes date back to 2013, while the prosecution alleges that the trafficking took place in 2018 and he committed rape in 2019. So we're looking at someone who transitioned from legitimate music success directly into systematic criminal activity, not someone who got desperate after years of failure. The case was brought by Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis, who alleged that the defendants used their record label, Pyres Music Group LLC, as a front to recruit and exploit women. This wasn't some street-level operation. This was an organized criminal enterprise that prosecutors said used Gibson's celebrity status and social media platforms to lure victims, with crimes taking place in a hotel room near Fulton Industrial Boulevard and at a residence in the Carroll Heights neighborhood. Story development: the criminal enterprise. So check it. The evidence presented during the 7-week trial included a 46-count RICO indictment filled with disturbing allegations. Prosecutors alleged an enterprise and racketeering activity that led to crimes of trafficking and other violence, claiming that Cash Out was a leader of the enterprise. This wasn't random criminal activity. This was systematic, organized, and designed to use legitimate business fronts to hide brutal exploitation. Although now administratively dissolved, Cash Out used PMG, Pyrex Music Group LLC, along with this brand name Cash Out, to promote his music and the Cash Out brand, and through the use of deception and then coercion, enticed and recruited women from social media platforms to engage in commercial activity, the re-indictment states. This shows the sophisticated nature of the operation, using his legitimate entertainment brand as a tool for criminal recruitment. The timeline of this criminal enterprise is crucial to understanding how someone transitions from legitimate entertainment success to systematic trafficking. According to court documents, Cash Out's racketeering crimes date back to 2013. just 1 year after his biggest hit reached number 1 on the Billboard Rap Airplay chart. This means he was already engaging in criminal enterprise activities while still having legitimate music success, not waiting until his career completely failed. The prosecution alleges that the trafficking took place in 2018 and he committed in 2019. This shows an escalation over time, from initial RICO activities in 2013 to systematic trafficking operations 5 years later to violent assault by 2019. The pattern suggests someone who became increasingly comfortable with criminal activity as the years went on, possibly emboldened by getting away with earlier crimes. What makes this case particularly disturbing is how the family integrated their criminal activities with their legitimate business operations. Prosecutors say Gibson used his fame and social media to lure women, while his family members played specific roles in the enterprise that were designed to appear legitimate on the surface. His mother, Linda Smith, known as Morenica Vinny and Mama Cashin Out, wasn't just enabling her son's crimes. She was an active participant with her own criminal responsibilities in the operation that warranted her own trafficking conviction. The way this operation worked was calculated and systematic, utilizing multiple properties and sophisticated recruitment methods. Prosecutors said Gibson used his celebrity status and social media platforms to lure victims, and that the crimes took place in a hotel room near Fulton Industrial Boulevard and at a residence in the Carroll Heights neighborhood. This geographical spread shows planning and organization, different locations for different aspects of the operation, reducing the risk of detection and creating infrastructure that could sustain ongoing criminal activity. The trio was convicted for using their record company, Pires Music Group, to coerce, entice, and recruit young women to engage in commercial activity. The sophistication of using a dissolved but previously legitimate business entity as cover shows criminal thinking that goes beyond street-level operation. This was enterprise-level planning that took advantage of entertainment industry norms to hide systematic exploitation. The case included jail calls, cell phone records, and surveillance footage that jurors said ultimately painted a clear picture of how this family-run operation systematically targeted, recruited, and exploited vulnerable women. The digital evidence was particularly compelling because it showed coordination between family members, documented their activities over time, and provided irrefutable proof of their involvement in criminal enterprise. What made this case particularly strong was the evidence from multiple sources that corroborated victim testimony. The case involved extensive evidence, including text messages recovered from 8 different cell phones, financial records, surveillance footage, and recorded jail calls. These weren't just allegations based on witness testimony. Prosecutors had documentary evidence that supported everything the victims said and proved the systematic nature of the criminal enterprise. The financial investigation revealed the scope of the criminal operation and how it was more profitable than Gibson's legitimate music career. Prosecutors say their investigation uncovered that Gibson's income from trafficking far exceeded any earnings from his music. When the money went down online, he went to the streets, said Deputy District Attorney Ernell Winfrey, showing how the transition from legitimate to criminal income was calculated and driven by profit rather than desperation. This financial evidence contradicts any narrative that this was survival crime or the result of someone becoming desperate after losing legitimate income. The investigation showed that trafficking was more profitable than music, suggesting that Gibson viewed criminal enterprise as a business opportunity rather than a last resort. This calculation makes the crimes more serious because it shows deliberate choice rather than circumstantial pressure. The role of family, how blood became criminal enterprise. Let me break down exactly how each family member contributed to this criminal enterprise, because understanding their specific roles shows how family loyalty can be corrupted into systematic criminal activity. Linda Smith's role was particularly crucial to the operation's success because she brought legitimacy and trust to the recruitment process that male recruiters couldn't have achieved. Gibson's mom, Linda Smith, was found guilty of a trafficking count and not guilty of another trafficking count and prostitution for her role. This shows she wasn't just peripherally involved or unknowingly enabling her son's crimes. She had specific criminal responsibilities within the operation that warranted her own trafficking conviction. Smith was found guilty of allowing property in her name to be used for prostitution, which demonstrates her active participation in facilitating the crimes rather than just being a concerned mother who got caught up in her son's activities. The genius of using Linda Smith in the recruitment process cannot be overstated. When potential victims received messages from an older woman about entertainment opportunities, the red flags that might have gone up if a young man sent the same messages were absent. There's an assumption of safety, of maternal guidance, of one woman helping another woman get opportunities, that Smith exploited ruthlessly to lower victims' defenses before delivering them into her son's criminal enterprise. Smith's 30-year sentence reflects the serious nature of her participation, while acknowledging that she wasn't the primary organizer of the criminal enterprise. Smith was sentenced to 10 years for trafficking and 20 years for RICO violations, with the RICO sentencing consecutive to the trafficking conviction. This structure shows that prosecutors viewed her both as an individual criminal trafficking conviction and as a participant in organized criminal enterprise RICO conviction. The cousin, Tyrone Taylor, brought a different element to the criminal enterprise: violence and assault that was used to control victims and maintain the operation. Taylor was convicted of a woman and forcing her into work, showing that the family operation included systematic violence as a tool of control. Taylor was found guilty on all counts, including and aggravated sodomy, except one. He was found not guilty on the pimping count, but his convictions for the most serious violent crimes show his role as an enforcer within the criminal enterprise. Taylor's sentencing reflects the severity of his violent crimes within the context of the organized enterprise. Taylor was also given 2 life sentences, one for and the other for the aggravated sodomy conviction. Taylor was also given a total of 94 years for the other charges he was convicted of, including a 20-year sentence for both the trafficking and RICO violation charges. The multiple life sentences plus additional years ensure that he will never have the opportunity to harm anyone else, regardless of appeals or sentence modifications. The family dynamic that enabled this criminal enterprise raises difficult questions about how blood relationships can override moral boundaries when criminal activity becomes profitable. These weren't strangers who came together to commit crimes. This was a family that made systematic exploitation and abuse their shared business model, with each member contributing their unique skills and resources to the criminal enterprise. Understanding how families can become criminal enterprises is important for law enforcement, social services, and communities trying to prevent these situations. The loyalty and tight bonds that help families survive difficult circumstances can be twisted into criminal conspiracies when the family decides to pursue illegal income together, with family loyalty overriding ethical considerations that should protect vulnerable people from exploitation. Evidence presentation: the overwhelming case. But let me tell you something that's some real disturbing evidence right there. The state's evidence was so compelling, and they had so much of it, according to an anonymous juror who spoke after the trial. This wasn't one of those cases where prosecutors had to rely on weak evidence or circumstantial connections. The evidence against Cashin Out, his mother, and his cousin was overwhelming and came from multiple sources that corroborated each other in ways that made denial impossible. "We took copious notes. You may have seen us scribbling," the juror said. "There was no swaying. We were very careful. We went count by count." This tells you that the jury took this case seriously, examined each piece of evidence carefully, and found the prosecution's case compelling enough to convict on multiple serious charges that carry life sentences. The deliberate, methodical approach the jury described shows they understood the gravity of their decisions and based them on careful consideration of the evidence. The victim testimony was central to the prosecution's case and provided the human context for all the documentary evidence that prosecutors presented. Victims read statements in court on Monday describing PTSD, depression, and other conditions from being trafficked. "For the rest of my life, I will fear that he will kill me, all because I wouldn't do what he wanted me to do," one victim said. These weren't just legal proceedings. These were real people describing real trauma they suffered at the hands of this family-run criminal operation, with lasting psychological damage that will affect them for the rest of their lives. The courage required for these women to come forward, testify against their abusers, and face cross-examination from defense attorneys trying to discredit them cannot be overstated. Trafficking victims often face intimidation, threats, and psychological manipulation designed to keep them silent. But these survivors chose to speak truth to power and help ensure their abusers faced justice. Their testimony provided the foundation for everything else the prosecution presented. Victim impact statements were read during the hearing, including one from a woman who was by both Gibson and Taylor. "The day these defendants chose to commit these crimes against me, they gave me a life sentence," the woman said. This powerful statement shows that while the defendants will serve their time in prison, the victims carry the trauma of these crimes for the rest of their lives. The psychological damage from systematic trafficking and assault doesn't end when the criminal case concludes. The financial evidence told its own story about this criminal enterprise and contradicted any defense narrative about desperation or circumstance. Prosecutors said their investigation uncovered that Gibson's income from trafficking far exceeded any earnings from his music. When the money went down online, he went to the streets, said Deputy District Attorney Ernell Winfrey. This contradicts any narrative that this was desperation crime. This was calculated criminal activity that was more profitable than his legitimate entertainment career. The financial investigation showed systematic money laundering and organized financial structures that supported the trafficking operation. Large cash deposits, payments for multiple properties, financial transactions that corresponded to criminal activities, all documented through bank records and financial forensics that showed this was an organized business operation rather than random criminal activity. The money trail provided irrefutable evidence of the scope and systematic nature of the criminal enterprise. The digital evidence was particularly damaging because it provided documentary proof of coordination, planning, and ongoing criminal activity. Text messages recovered from 8 different cell phones provided prosecutors with evidence of how the operation was coordinated, who was involved, and what roles each family member played in the systematic exploitation of victims. In the modern era, criminals leave digital footprints everywhere they go, and this case shows how that evidence can be used to build prosecutions that are impossible to defend against. The text messages were particularly damaging because they showed knowledge, intent, and coordination that contradicted any defense claims about misunderstanding or unknowing participation. Messages coordinating activities, discussing victims, planning logistics, handling problems, all documented in the defendant's own words through their digital communications. Defense attorneys can't argue ignorance or innocent association when the defendant's own messages show deliberate participation in criminal enterprise. Surveillance footage provided visual confirmation of activities that victims described and that digital evidence documented. The case included jail calls, cell phone records, and surveillance footage that jurors said ultimately painted a clear picture of criminal enterprise operations. Video evidence is particularly powerful for juries because it shows actual behavior rather than just testimony or documents, providing visual proof that supports other forms of evidence. Recorded jail calls provided additional evidence of consciousness of guilt and attempts to obstruct justice. All 3 defendants made calls from jail after their arrests in which they discussed their case, tried to coordinate their stories, and even attempted to influence potential witnesses. These calls showed they knew they were guilty and were trying to manipulate the legal process rather than simply maintaining their innocence. The prosecution's strategy, how they built an unbeatable case. Now let me break down exactly how Fulton County prosecutors built such a strong case that resulted in these life sentences, because understanding their strategy shows how modern law enforcement approaches organized criminal enterprises, especially when they involve celebrities or entertainment industry figures. Winfrey said the conviction was the result of a joint effort across multiple jurisdictions and divisions, showing this wasn't just a local prosecution, but a coordinated effort involving multiple law enforcement agencies. The prosecution's approach demonstrates how modern RICO cases are built from the ground up, starting with individual victim testimony and building outward to show the systematic nature of criminal enterprise. Prosecutors didn't just charge individual crimes. They built a comprehensive case showing how each crime fit into a larger pattern of organized criminal activity designed to generate ongoing revenue through systematic exploitation. Deputy District Attorney Ernell Winfrey revealed key insights into their prosecution strategy in an exclusive interview, saying their investigation uncovered that Gibson's income from trafficking far exceeded any earnings from his music. This financial analysis was crucial to proving that trafficking wasn't a desperate side hustle, but a calculated business decision that was more profitable than legitimate entertainment work. When the money went down online, he went to the streets, Winfrey said, showing how prosecutors traced the connection between declining music revenue and increasing criminal activity. The prosecution's use of financial forensics to trace money flows and compare legitimate versus criminal income was sophisticated and comprehensive. They didn't just show that crimes occurred, they showed how profitable those crimes were, how they were organized to maximize revenue, and how they generated more money than the defendant's legitimate activities. This financial evidence was crucial for RICO convictions because it proved ongoing criminal enterprise rather than isolated criminal incidents. The way prosecutors coordinated victim testimony with documentary evidence created a compelling narrative that was impossible for defense attorneys to discredit. Each victim's testimony was supported by digital evidence, financial records, surveillance footage, and other forms of proof that corroborated their accounts. Defense attorneys couldn't attack victim credibility when every claim was backed up by independent evidence that prosecutors had collected through comprehensive investigation. The prosecution's decision to bring RICO charges rather than just individual criminal charges shows strategic thinking about how to address systematic criminal enterprise. Individual trafficking or assault charges might have resulted in shorter sentences that didn't reflect the organized nature of the crimes, but RICO charges allowed prosecutors to show how each family member participated in ongoing criminal enterprise that caused systematic harm over an extended period. Industry implications: what this means for entertainment. This case has significant implications for the entertainment industry and how it identifies, prevents, and responds to criminal activity by artists and industry figures. The fact that Gibson used his legitimate record label and entertainment brand as a front for criminal recruitment shows how entertainment industry infrastructure can be weaponized for criminal purposes. Record labels, booking agents, managers, and other industry figures need to develop better protocols for identifying and reporting suspected trafficking or exploitation, especially when artists are using industry connections and platforms to facilitate criminal activity. The defendants used their record label, Pires Music Group LLC, as a front to recruit and exploit women, which means industry professionals might have been in position to notice suspicious activity if they had known what warning signs to look for. The entertainment industry's glamorization of certain criminal activities, particularly pimping and exploitation of women, contributed to cultural conditions that made this type of criminal enterprise seem acceptable or even admirable to some people. Hip-hop culture has historically celebrated pimp narratives, treated controlling women as something to brag about, and presented exploitation as just another hustle rather than serious criminal activity that destroys lives. This case should force the entertainment industry to reckon with how it promotes, markets, and profits from content that glorifies systematic exploitation. When artists celebrate trafficking in their music, when labels profit from content that promotes exploitation, when media outlets glamorize criminal lifestyles, all of that contributes to cultural conditions that make actual trafficking seem acceptable rather than horrific. Industry figures need education about trafficking indicators, reporting protocols, and their responsibilities when they suspect criminal activity by artists or other industry participants. This includes recognizing when an artist's lifestyle doesn't match their legitimate income, when their business operations involve suspicious activities, when vulnerable people are being targeted through entertainment industry promises. The financial aspects of this case also have implications for how the entertainment industry monitors and reports suspicious financial activity. When an artist's spending significantly exceeds their legitimate entertainment income, that should trigger questions about alternative revenue sources, especially if those sources involve activities that could harm vulnerable people. Cultural analysis: what this means for hip-hop. For the hip-hop community specifically, this case represents a moment of reckoning about how the culture has historically treated exploitation, family dynamics, and criminal activity. The fact that this was a family-run criminal enterprise that used hip-hop industry infrastructure to facilitate trafficking raises difficult questions about cultural values and community responsibility. Hip-hop has often celebrated getting money by any means necessary, without adequately examining what any means might include, or who gets harmed when those means involve criminal activity. Cash Out's case shows the logical endpoint of that philosophy when taken to its extreme: systematic exploitation of vulnerable people justified by profit and enabled by cultural acceptance of criminal activity as legitimate hustle. The role of family in enabling rather than preventing criminal activity challenges assumptions about family as a positive force that helps people resist criminal temptations. Linda Smith's active participation in her son's trafficking operation shows how family loyalty can override moral boundaries and enable systematic harm rather than providing the protective influence that families should represent. The hip-hop community needs to have difficult conversations about the difference between understanding why people turn to crime versus celebrating it, between acknowledging street realities versus glorifying exploitation, between keeping it real about where you came from versus promoting harmful behavior to the next generation. Artists who have platforms and influence need to think seriously about what messages they're sending and what impact those messages have on vulnerable people who might take them seriously. This case also highlights the importance of legitimate success and protecting opportunities when they arise. Cash Out had genuine success with Cashin Out reaching number 1 on the Billboard Rap Airplay chart. But he chose to use that success as a platform for criminal activity rather than building something positive and sustainable. That choice destroyed not only his own life, but the lives of multiple victims who were exploited through his criminal enterprise. For young artists coming up now, Cash Out's story should serve as the ultimate cautionary tale about protecting legitimate opportunities and making smart choices even when quick money seems appealing. The temptation to use fame for criminal activity might seem attractive in the short term, but the consequences, life in prison, destroyed families, traumatized victims, are catastrophic and permanent. The defendant's responses. Now let's talk about how each family member responded when they had the chance to speak at sentencing, because their statements reveal a lot about their mindset and their refusal to take responsibility for the harm they caused. At sentencing, each defendant had a chance to speak, and their responses were telling. "The things I've been accused of, I know I haven't done those things," Gibson said. The rapper rejected that he was guilty of trafficking, coercion, or saying the jury had made the wrong judgment, suggesting the victims were bullied into testifying against him and invoking Jesus as a falsely accused figure. This shows someone who, even after being convicted on overwhelming evidence, refuses to acknowledge the harm he caused to multiple victims. "I take accountability. I pray for them continually," Smith said. But this statement is contradicted by her role in the criminal enterprise. You can't claim accountability while participating in systematic trafficking and exploitation. Her statement seems designed to generate sympathy rather than genuine remorse for her actions. "The victims who are accusing me, I didn't do it," Taylor told the court. Like his cousin Cash Out, Taylor maintained his innocence despite being convicted on multiple charges including and aggravated sodomy. This pattern of denial from all three family members shows a complete lack of accountability for the systematic harm they caused. His attorney had asked for a 30-year sentence, saying the prosecution recommended 25 years before the trial, which he hadn't accepted because he wanted his day in court. The attorney asked the judge not to impose a trial penalty, which would result in harsher sentencing. This reveals that Cash Out could have taken a plea deal for 25 years but chose to go to trial, gambling that he could avoid conviction entirely and ending up with life in prison instead. The contrast between the defendant's denials and the victim's impact statements is stark. While the family members maintained their innocence and blamed everyone else, victims described PTSD, depression, and other conditions from being trafficked, with one saying, "For the rest of my life, I will fear that he will kill me, all because I wouldn't do what he wanted me to do." This shows the lasting trauma that victims carry while their attackers refuse to acknowledge responsibility. Analysis section. Understanding the sentences and their implications. The real kicker though, and this is where people need to understand how federal and state RICO prosecutions work, is why Cash Out received life in prison plus 70 years, his mother Linda Smith got 30 years, and his cousin Tyrone Taylor also got life plus 70 years. All three were convicted under Georgia's RICO Act, which is designed to combat organized criminal enterprises rather than individual crimes, and the sentences reflect both the systematic nature of their crimes and the multiple victims who were harmed. Let me break down exactly what each family member was convicted of, because understanding the specific charges explains why the sentences were so severe and why appeals are unlikely to succeed. Gibson was sentenced to 2 life sentences for and aggravated sodomy. The aggravated sodomy charge is concurrent with sentence. He was also given a total of 75 years for the other charges he was convicted of. He was given 20 years each for the 2 trafficking counts and 20 years for RICO violations. The structure of Gibson's sentencing reflects the multiple categories of harm he caused. The life sentences for and assault recognize the most serious violent crimes he committed against individual victims. The additional 75 years for trafficking and RICO violations recognize his role as the leader of a systematic criminal enterprise that harmed multiple victims over an extended period. Even if the life sentences were somehow overturned on appeal, the additional 75 years would ensure he remains incarcerated for the rest of his natural life. Smith was sentenced to 10 years for trafficking and 20 years for RICO violations. The RICO sentencing is consecutive to the trafficking conviction. This means she's serving 30 years total, 10 years for her direct participation in trafficking, plus an additional 20 years for being part of the organized criminal enterprise. The consecutive sentencing structure reflects that being part of a RICO enterprise is viewed as a separate and additional crime beyond the individual trafficking charge. The distinction between Smith's sentence and her son's sentence reflects the different levels of responsibility and harm within the criminal enterprise. While she was an active participant who enabled and facilitated the operation, she wasn't the primary organizer or the person who committed the most serious violent crimes. However, 30 years at her age is effectively a life sentence, ensuring she will spend her remaining years in prison for her role in systematically exploiting vulnerable women. Taylor was also given 2 life sentences, one for and the other for the aggravated sodomy conviction. Taylor was also given a total of 94 years for the other charges he was convicted of, including a 20-year sentence for both the trafficking and RICO violation charges. His sentencing structure is similar to Gibson's because his crimes were similar: systematic participation in criminal enterprise combined with serious violent crimes against individual victims. The fact that both Gibson and Taylor received multiple life sentences plus additional years reflects the prosecution's strategy of ensuring that even if some convictions are overturned on appeal, there are enough remaining charges to keep them incarcerated for life. This is standard practice in RICO cases where defendants face multiple serious charges, creating redundancy that protects against appeals and ensures sentences match the systematic nature of the crimes. Before announcing sentences for the 3 defendants, Judge Leftridge summed up the trial as exposing the very worst of human behavior toward other human beings, and stated that the court's sentencing would reflect the severity of the defendants' actions. This wasn't a judge throwing the book at defendants out of spite. This was a careful consideration of the systematic nature of the crimes, the multiple victims who were harmed, and the need to ensure these defendants never have the opportunity to harm anyone else. The RICO convictions are what elevated this from regular criminal charges to enterprise-level sentences that reflect the organized nature of the criminal activity. I am grateful to the jury for recognizing the full scope of these crimes through the lens of RICO and seeing them for what they truly are: organized and calculated acts of cruelty, according to a statement from the prosecutor's office. RICO allows prosecutors to charge people not just for individual crimes, but for being part of systematic criminal organizations that cause ongoing harm to communities and victims. This conviction sends a clear message that the buying and selling of human beings, the coercion into sex work, will be met with the full force of the law. Our prosecutors remain steadfast in their mission to hold traffickers accountable, no matter how powerful or well-connected they may be. In Fulton County, there is no safe haven for those who prey on the vulnerable. This statement shows that prosecutors were sending a message beyond just this specific case. They're warning other potential traffickers that celebrity status, family connections, or sophisticated operations won't protect them from serious consequences when they choose to exploit vulnerable people. The additional conditions imposed on all 3 defendants show how seriously the court views these crimes and the ongoing risk they might pose even after incarceration. All 3 are permanently banned from contact with victims and from returning to locations involved in the trafficking operation. Gibson must register as a sex offender, avoid all victims, and stay away from key addresses connected to the case. These restrictions acknowledge that the harm caused by trafficking extends beyond the immediate crimes and requires ongoing protection for survivors. For y'all who might not understand how these sentences work in practice, let me explain what life plus 70 years actually means in the context of the American justice system. The multiple life sentences plus additional years ensure that even if some convictions get overturned on appeal, there's enough time to keep Gibson and Taylor locked up forever. This redundancy is deliberately designed to prevent any possibility of release, regardless of legal challenges, good behavior, or changing laws. The victim's perspective. The most important voices in this case are the victims who survived this family-run trafficking operation and found the courage to come forward, testify, and help bring their abusers to justice. Victims read statements in court describing PTSD, depression, and other conditions from being trafficked, and their words should be central to how we understand the true impact of this criminal enterprise. One victim impact statement was read from a woman who was by both Gibson and Taylor, saying, "The day these defendants chose to commit these crimes against me, they gave me a life sentence." This powerful statement shows that while the defendants will serve their time in prison, the victims carry the trauma of these crimes for the rest of their lives. "For the rest of my life, I will fear that he will kill me, all because I wouldn't do what he wanted me to do," one victim said. This statement reveals the level of fear and intimidation that was used to control victims and why many trafficking victims don't come forward. The psychological control extends far beyond the physical crimes. The juror expressed sorrow for everyone involved. "I'm so sad. I'm sad for the victims, and I'm sad for the defendants too," she said. While the juror acknowledged the tragedy of seeing lives destroyed on both sides, it's important to remember that the defendants made choices that led to these consequences, while the victims were targeted and exploited against their will. The courage these women showed in coming forward, testifying against their abusers, and helping prosecutors build this case cannot be overstated. Trafficking victims often face threats, intimidation, and psychological manipulation designed to keep them silent, but these survivors chose to speak truth to power and help ensure their abusers faced justice. Lessons and implications. What lessons should the hip-hop community and society at large take from Cash Out's downfall? First, legitimate success in entertainment doesn't immunize you from consequences if you choose to engage in systematic criminal activity. Cash Out had genuine success with Cashin Out reaching #1 on the Billboard rap airplay chart and scoring another hit with She Twerkin', but that success became a tool for criminal recruitment rather than a foundation for building something positive. Second, family dynamics can become corrupted when criminal enterprise becomes the family business. Linda Smith's active participation in her son's trafficking operation shows how family loyalty can override moral boundaries and enable systematic harm, rather than providing the positive influence that families should represent. Third, the entertainment industry needs better mechanisms for identifying and reporting suspected trafficking, especially when artists are using their platforms and industry connections to facilitate criminal activity. The defendants used their record label, Pi-Res Music Group LLC, as a front to recruit and exploit women, which means industry figures might have been in position to notice suspicious activity if they had known what to look for. When the money went down online, he went to the streets, said Deputy District Attorney Ernell Winfrey. This suggests that financial pressure from declining music success contributed to Cash Out's decision to engage in trafficking, which raises questions about support systems for artists whose careers decline and alternative paths for generating income legally. For young artists coming up now, Cash Out's story should serve as the ultimate cautionary tale about protecting legitimate opportunities and making smart choices even when success fades. The temptation to use fame for criminal activity might seem appealing in the short term, but the consequences, life in prison, destroyed families, traumatized victims, are catastrophic and permanent. Final thoughts and call to action. At the end of the day, Cash Out's situation exposes the very worst of human behavior toward other human beings, according to the judge who sentenced him. This isn't just about a rapper who made poor choices. This is about systematic exploitation, family-enabled criminal enterprise, and the destruction of multiple lives for financial gain. This conviction sends a clear message that the buying and selling of human beings, the coercion into sex work, will be met with the full force of the law. The sentences in this case, life plus 70 years for Cash Out, 30 years for his mother, life plus 70 years for his cousin, represent more than punishment for individual crimes. They represent society's judgment that organized trafficking enterprises will face the harshest possible consequences regardless of the perpetrator's fame or status. Our prosecutors remain steadfast in their mission to hold traffickers accountable, no matter how powerful or well-connected they may be. In Fulton County, there is no safe haven for those who prey on the vulnerable. This message should resonate throughout the entertainment industry and beyond. Celebrity status will not protect you from consequences if you choose to exploit and abuse vulnerable people. What are your thoughts on Cash Out's life sentence and the role his family played in this trafficking operation? Do you think the sentences were appropriate given the systematic nature of the crimes and the trauma inflicted on multiple victims? How should the hip-hop community respond to cases like this where artists use their fame and platforms to facilitate serious crimes that harm vulnerable people? And most importantly, what can be done to prevent similar situations in the future, both preventing artists from making these destructive choices and protecting vulnerable people from being targeted by trafficking operations that use entertainment industry promises as bait? These are difficult conversations, but they're necessary if we want hip-hop culture to evolve beyond celebrating and enabling the kind of systematic exploitation that led to Cash Out's life sentence. Share your thoughts in the comments and make sure to engage respectfully, especially when discussing the victims and the serious nature of trafficking crimes. This ain't entertainment or gossip. This is about real harm done to real people by individuals who chose to use their advantages to exploit rather than uplift, and we need to treat it with the seriousness it deserves while having honest conversations about accountability and prevention. If you know someone who might be a victim of trafficking, if you see situations that don't look right, if you have information about criminal activity that's harming vulnerable people, speak up, reach out to authorities, do something rather than staying silent. The victims in Cash Out's case got justice because eventually someone was brave enough to come forward, and more people need to have that courage if we're going to address trafficking and exploitation seriously. Click on the related content for more deep dives into cases where fame and criminal activity intersect, where family dynamics enable destructive behavior, and where the justice system responds to organized criminal enterprises. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future breakdowns of cases that the hip-hop community and society need to understand and learn from. Hit that notification bell, because when we cover these serious topics, you want to be part of the conversation about accountability, justice, and prevention. Remember, for every cash out whose criminal activity gets exposed and prosecuted, there may be similar situations happening right now that haven't been discovered yet. Staying informed about how trafficking operations work, recognizing the signs of exploitation, and supporting survivors who come forward. That's how we create environments where this kind of systematic abuse becomes harder to sustain and more likely to be stopped before it destroys more lives. This is the kind of content that matters beyond just keeping up with hip-hop news. This is about understanding real consequences of real crimes, holding people accountable regardless of their fame or family connections, and centering victims' experiences in conversations that often focus only on the perpetrators. That's what we're committed to bringing you. Factual analysis based on court evidence, deep dives that go beyond headlines, and discussions that help everyone understand what happened and why it matters for the culture and for society. Until next time, choose legitimate paths even when they're harder than criminal shortcuts. Protect vulnerable people in your community, and remember that no amount of money or fame is worth the devastating consequences that come from systematic exploitation of others. Cash Out learned that lesson too late, paid the ultimate price by losing his freedom forever, and left behind victims who are still dealing with trauma while he and his family serve sentences that ensure they'll never have the opportunity to harm anyone else. Peace, y'all. We'll catch you in the next one with more stories that need to be told and more conversations that the culture needs to have, even when they're uncomfortable, because understanding how we got here is the first step toward making sure it doesn't happen again.